Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you taking time to be here with us this morning. First, I hope everyone is healthy and safe and doing what they need to stay that way. My name is Andrea Ray, and I have the pleasure to serve as the President CEO at the Seattle Southside Chamber. And on behalf of our board and our staff, welcome to our SMART Southside Mitigation and Recovery Task Force webinar on de-escalation. Thank you so much to our sponsor, South King Media. Scott and Teresa Schaefer have been tireless advocates for our community. As a small business themselves, they are dedicated to helping other small businesses grow, as well as keeping our community connected and informed. Through the miracle of technology, Scott is also broadcasting this webinar live on Facebook. So thank you so much, Scott, for helping us reach more people in our community. We really appreciate your support and your dedication. Each week, SMART is presenting a topic on a subject matter that's impacting our community. We hope that you will join us for more of these webinars so that you can stay connected and informed on how to best respond to what's happening within our community. You can register for upcoming webinars on our website, seattlesouthsidechamber.com, as well as view past webinars so that you can get a sense and idea of some of the subject matters that we've tackled already. If you have ideas on new subject matters, please send us that information so that we can schedule those future webinars. We know that providing opportunities to share information and connect will make our community stronger and ready for recovery. And we hope that you will join us for more of these opportunities. And if you or your company is able to donate or sponsor this work so that we can continue to serve our community in and through this challenge, it would be greatly appreciated. Every little bit helps. Even a donation of $1 brings us closer to recovery and helps keep our nonprofit strong and able to serve our community. Thank you. And for those of us who are joining through Zoom as an attendee, you are able to connect and talk to our panelists by using the Q&A or the chat function. For those of you that are joining through Facebook, if you have questions for our panelists, please go ahead and put those in the comments section, and Scott will help get those to me so that I can help facilitate with our panelists. And now it is my great honor to introduce to you our guest speaker today, Melissa Glenn. Melissa is a licensed mental health counselor, and her professional experience includes clinical work and housing programs, outpatient and inpatient treatment, and academic settings. Her current role as King County Library Systems Health and Social Services Coordinator involves supporting community wellness programming, building service provider partnerships, and training staff. Melissa, we are so thrilled to welcome you here, and over to you.
Thank you, Andrea, for the introduction and the invitation. And good morning, everyone, to those of you who are watching on Zoom and on Facebook. I am really honored and excited to be here this morning, and I think this will be fun. So as Andrea introduced, we'll be talking about de-escalation today. I'll be giving you some tips and tools for responding to hostility in the workplace. We are in very uncertain times right now, and tensions are high. So the skills that we review today will be helpful to you in responding to people who have disruptive or upsetting behavior. So here we go, next slide. I always like to start out training and presentation with an outline of what you can expect. So here is our agenda for the morning. We'll start out talking about what is de-escalation. This is probably a term that most of us have heard, but maybe have different ideas about what it means. So I want to make sure we all start out on the same page. I'm then going to teach a 4-step de-escalation model that you'll be able to hopefully feel comfortable using some of the components of after we talk this morning. That de-escalation model has to do with engaging individuals who are upset. So I'm going to then shift gears and talk a little bit about hostile groups of people and how to manage that. And then at the end of the presentation, we will have an opportunity for questions. I want to acknowledge that most of you are attending this morning probably in a professional capacity. But the content of this presentation really applies to all settings. So when I go through this de-escalation model, it's effective in your neighborhoods, it's effective when you're at work, it's effective even in your household. So I want you to listen this morning with an awareness of the many hats that you wear. And I think if you do that, you'll get the most out of the conference today. Also want to give a caveat that I'm an educator at heart. So a lot of my presentations and trainings involve a high degree of interaction. I think we learn best when we get to dialogue about what I'm teaching. So be prepared to participate. Heads up. Next slide. Andrea already did a great job of introducing me. As she mentioned, I'm a mental health counselor here in Washington State. I have over 10 years of experience working in mental health and social services. I also have done some teaching in local graduate and undergraduate programs. And I currently work for the King County Library System. I absolutely love my job. I get to do a lot of work in communities, much like I'm doing today, and meet people who are doing all kinds of really innovative, exciting things, talk about how we can collaborate and work together. So this is a very fun part of my job. I also work with our local library staff to plan and facilitate community wellness programming. And I do a lot of in-house training for our staff around trauma, de-escalation, and mental health. So the variety to the job is really fun, and I feel really privileged to be able to bring my skills out to our partners like I am today. So you know a little bit about me. On this next slide, I would like an opportunity to get to know a little bit about who is joining us here today. So this is your first opportunity to interact with me, our first conversation point. If you would put a few words into the chat or the Q&A on Facebook to let us know, why is de-escalation important to you? Why was it worth you tuning in today to gain some skills and tools? And then what might be a difficult situation you encounter in your personal or your professional life where you hope to use some of these tools? So go ahead and take a moment to type into the chat there.
And while people are taking a moment to type into the chat, I just wanted to again, say thank you so much, Melissa, for being here. Again, we've been hearing a lot of stories, here at the Chamber, from, businesses that are, experiencing some tense moments, with their customers.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said at the beginning, tensions are high. Tensions are high at home. Tensions are high at work. And so learning some skills, to help is huge. And so people typing into the chat here. So again, we're welcoming Port Jobs. Port Jobs is an amazing chamber member and partner, with our work. And just, again, asking for a refresher course, right? That making sure that this work is top of mind. I know a lot of companies already do this training as part of, kind of general onboarding training, customer service training. But the refresher is really good. Another comment here is that, again, the world just feels, really violent right now. And, how can we learn, better as a society, right? So, again, even talking about, the relationship, with the police. And many people might call the police because of a hostile situation. And I'm sure you'll talk about that later about, when does it make sense, to call for help. But there might also be other opportunities, to try to de-escalate a situation. So again, really appreciate that. Thanks to everybody for those putting the thoughts in the comments.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. Based upon what I'm hearing and reading, I think that we are on the right track. I appreciate the comment about calling the police when it may not be necessary. And we are going to talk a little bit about how important it is and how reasonable it is to be able to escalate something sort of at the lowest point of crisis so that it doesn't get more severe. Yeah. I see one more comment in here. I want to make sure I read that. Working with the public, people who may be experiencing mental health issues. or feeling angry and how to handle that in a calm and polite way, when to call for assistance. This is really great input. Thank you to all of you. And yes, we are going to cover these things, so you're in the right place today. Thank you for checking in with me. Next slide, please. So as promised, I'm going to give you a definition of de-escalation. For today's purposes, de-escalation is bringing a volatile, potentially unsafe situation to a peaceful resolution without anyone being hurt. So I'll read that again, bringing a volatile, potentially unsafe situation to a peaceful resolution without anyone being hurt. And you'll see that word unsafe in there. When I say unsafe, I'm referring to safety of people and then safety of environment or property or physical space. So de-escalation requires learned skills that are used to reduce emotional intensity. And notice I said learned skills. Most of us are not born feeling very comfortable in a crisis situation. I will say that over the course of my life and career, I've run into a few people who feel really comfortable in an emergency. They seem to just jump right into action, know what to do, who to call. They might even walk toward the crisis. You may know some of those folks yourself. But for most of us, that's not the case. Most of us feel afraid, uncertain. We lack confidence of what to do in a crisis or how to respond to someone when they're upset, and that's natural. The good news is that we can learn skills that will help us feel more comfortable, and with practice, we can be very effective in managing and addressing these sort of situations. So some of those learned skills that I'm talking about are things like active listening, knowing how to assess level of danger, exploring people's needs, knowing your own limitations and your own triggers, and then also knowing when to call for help. And those are all skills that we'll talk about today. So if you're coming into this feeling like, oh, I'm not very comfortable with the subject matter, you're in good company and there's room for us all to grow. Next slide. Why is de-escalation important? This is your second opportunity to interact with me. Why do you think learning these skills and practicing these skills is important? If you're comfortable, just put a few words in the chat. What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to prevent?
Thanks, Melissa. So while people are taking a minute to kind of type their answers into that chat, I know from talking to a lot of our business owners, de-escalation, it's their livelihood, right? So they want to, they don't want to lose customers because, someone feels unsafe. Again, we know how difficult the local economy is right now, and, how hard it is. And so that's a huge piece. The other thing, they don't want to lose employees, right? So if an employee feels unsafe or unprepared to, handle a crisis, they don't want to lose an employee either. So, wanting to maintain, their employees and keep their employees safe, wanting to maintain their customers and keep their customers safe. That's from our perspective, at the chamber. But again, as you mentioned, de-escalation is also important in our personal relationships as well, right? We want to maintain, the personal relationships that we have, and de-escalation is really important to that. So I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts that they want to, put into the chat about why they think de-escalation is important, or if I kind of summed it up for everybody.
Yeah, it feels like there's a lot at stake when we're talking about livelihood and safety. Yeah, thank you, Andrea. There are a few additional points that we'll put up on the screen one by one. This is why I think de-escalation is important, in addition to those things that Andrea called out. The first is that violence can escalate really quickly if it's not addressed. So our goal is always to resolve a problem at the lowest level of impact if possible. Maybe you've observe this or experience this when you're interacting with someone who emotionally is pretty high. If we try to match their tone, they might kick it up a notch. And if we match that tone, they might kick it up again. And pretty soon the situation is escalating. If there are other people around, they might get involved. And that can create a lot of chaos and a lot of unsafety. So we want to try to resolve things at the lowest level possible. The second point, which Andrea, you introduced so nicely, is that we want to ensure safety of community members, of staff, and of the environment. The third point is that when we model de-escalation skills and we regulate our own emotions well, we teach community members a new way of interacting. And I have to give a caveat here, which is that I come from a counseling background, and I often give this presentation to social service providers, and our clientele is a little bit different than customers. So some of the content here may apply more to a clinical setting and not as much to a business setting. So this is where I invite you to, again, to think of the many hats you wear and where you might use these skills in different places. So back to teaching people a different way of interacting. When we model de-escalation for them, we are showing people that they can advocate for themselves rather than using violence to get what they want. There are people in our communities who, for a variety of reasons, have learned that being violent or being unkind or being aggressive is the best way to get what they want. And we know that that's not always true. So when we're able to resolve something with someone peacefully and respectfully, we show them that there are a number of ways to get to the end result they're hoping for. We also show people that relationships can be repaired, that we may get in a disagreement or even in an argument, but we can still come to a resolution and move forward in our relationship. They can still patron your business even if they don't agree with you. We also are modeling for people how to regulate our own emotions and respond appropriately to difficult situations, which again is a learned skill. For those of you who do that well, someone taught you when you were growing up what kind of a response matched a certain type of situation. Next point, de-escalation is important because good customer service means being prepared for all situations and caring for customers in any state. As business owners and business people, you want to serve very well the customers who come in with a positive attitude and they're ready to utilize your product, and the customers who come in with not such a great attitude and might need a little extra support to move forward. And then lastly, de-escalation is essential for staff self-care. Andrea, you talked about wanting to support staff and ensure safety of staff. When staff are continually interacting with customers who are challenging, it may lead to burnout, it may lead to workplace dissatisfaction. And so if we're able to resolve things at a lower level, the impact of trauma is reduced on staff.
Sorry, I was on mute. I just like to add a little bit to that, you know, collectively, we're already kind of in a trauma state.
We are. Yeah.
Right. And so it's not surprising that we're all just a little closer to that edge, right?
Yes,
you know, because we're all, so I really appreciate what you're talking about in terms of, you know, self-care and de-escalation and, you know, trying to reduce the trauma. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah. We're all feeling edgy, myself included. Our nerves are kind of raw. Our patience is not what it normally is. We're feeling uncertain. And so part of having all this top of mind is also recognizing where we're at when we come into work in the morning and what we are bringing with us when we interact with customers. Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Next slide. We're going to do some practice here. I am going to read a scenario. This is something that I made up, but it might sound plausible or familiar to you. And as I'm reading, I want you to think about what would you do if you were in this situation, or maybe what have you done if you've been in a similar situation. So imagine this, you are in the midst of a busy workday. You're managing colleagues, juggling online and curbside business procedures, and keeping up with frequent disinfecting protocols. Your safety guidelines are clearly posted on the front door, including a sign that says all customers must wear a mask to enter. A customer walks into your business without a mask on. You greet them and ask that they please put on a mask if they'd like to be served. The customer rolls their eyes and comes close and leans towards you and refuses. This is so stupid. I shouldn't have to wear a mask if I don't want to. It's my health and my body. I've seen plenty of people in stores without masks. Do you want my business or not? I'll go somewhere else and tell other people you're discriminating against customers. A lot of intimidation and aggression here. Think for a minute and please share with me in the chat or the comment section on Facebook, what might you do if you encountered this situation? What might you say? How might you feel? What responses are coming to mind?
While we're waiting for that, I'll just share a little bit. My father owned a pharmacy, for almost 50 years. And so I had an opportunity to see, good examples of de-escalation and also maybe not so good, examples of, de-escalation. And I think that, what's interesting, about this scenario is that it is very common. Right. And, we've seen it, escalate, right. Where people, where it's like, well, then leave, right. Like, okay, fine, come at me, right. Like, toe to toe. Obviously that's, that's not de-escalating the situation. But I've found that often kind of using, humor, and trying to, relate to someone.
Yeah.
Also helps. So, maybe making it less about, the person or less about the business, but just, recognizing, the person where they're at to say, again, man, sounds like you're having a tough day,
Yes,
and
then
validate that. Validate their experience, and then, giving the options, right? So, okay, well, if you don't want to come in and wear a mask, please stand outside and I'll be with you right as soon as I can, help the people in the store. That's worked, for several, situations that have come up. But again, it's tricky. And like you said, you don't always know how to respond. And then how do you take that, it's that pit in your stomach of like, oh, right. Like, really, like, this is what I have to deal with. How do you, keep that in check so that you can respond appropriately. But those would just be my initial thoughts, as we know that this is a very common thing happening in a lot of businesses these days.
It is. Yeah, thank you, Andrea. When you first chimed in, you were talking about what I think is a sort of an instinctual response to fight, flee, or freeze. Do we go toe to toe with this person? Do we try to get out of the situation as quickly as we can, or ask them to leave? Or are we just sort of stuck, like, I don't know what to do, this is uncomfortable, I don't really want to deal with this? And any one of those responses is pretty normal. I'm seeing some great responses here in the chat. Work on reaching a resolution with this customer. I think that that's a great idea. Can we sort of meet in the middle and come up with a solution that we're both happy with? And someone might say, we have masks here for you if you need one, otherwise we need to leave for everyone's health and safety. I think that's great. If you know you're going to require something of someone, then having it on hand to offer to them is a really wonderful solution. Yeah. I'm sorry you feel that way. Yes, validation and empathy and understanding go a long way in calming someone's nerves. We will provide you with a mask. This is really great feedback. Someone saying, if you're not able to follow the rules, you can leave and call us and we'll assist you via telephone. So offering options. These are really great responses. You're all a bit ahead of me. You're helping me teach my presentation. Thank you. Because you're already doing this work, right? These are situations you're encountering every day, and it sounds like you're doing a wonderful job managing them. Thank you so much for that feedback. So we're going to return to this scenario a little later in the presentation and practice applying some of the skills and tools from the model to this person. So next slide. This is a 4-step de-escalation model that we're going to explore today. This model works really well in all settings with people at most stages of escalation or upset. So again, you can use bits and pieces of these skills and tools with family members, maybe with your spouse or your toddler or your teenager, with roommates, when you're out in the community, when you're in your workplace, and not just with customers, but even with colleagues who may be getting upset in the workplace. So again, think of all those many hats that you're wearing. So the first step of the de-escalation model is to identify warning signs. The second is to diffuse hostility. The third is make a plan for safety and follow-up. And the fourth is to debrief. So as I mentioned, this model, these skills work well with people who are in various stages of aggression, from those who are just starting to display signs that they may be upset, to others who have sort of fully blown their top. You can come in at any point and use some of these tools and they will usually be effective. There are instances though when the safest thing to do is not to intervene and to immediately call for help. Those are things like medical emergencies, if someone's threatening to harm themselves, other people, or the physical space. If you know that someone has a weapon, or if there's some kind of criminal activity, you want to just go ahead and call probably for police backup or call a crisis line. But when the situation isn't quite that severe yet, you can use these skills with a lot of effectiveness. So let's dive into looking at each of these steps more in depth. Next slide teaches us about identifying warning signs. Warning signs are behavioral and verbal cues that indicate agitation or hostility. So these are things that you observe. You see them, you hear them, you perceive them, and you think, something's not quite right here. This person seems upset. Warning signs are what you want to look for. This is our first step. So the next slide outlines some behavioral warning signs of aggression. If you notice that someone has a fearful or anxious appearance, if they are breathing rapidly and quickly, shallow breaths, if they are sort of staring really intensely, their fists are clenched, pacing back and forth, if someone is displaying angry or inappropriate gestures, that could be punching a fist. It could be maybe slamming hands down on a table, slamming chairs around, slamming doors. Those are angry gestures. Or behavior that's inconsistent with words. So someone might say, that is inconsistent with the words that they're saying. These are behavioral warning signs of aggression, things that you want to look out for, or red flags, we could say. On the next slide, I have examples of verbal warning signs of aggression. You want to look out for raised voice or shouting, swearing, using an angry tone, sexual comments, blaming other people, claiming mistreatment. So someone might maybe accuse you or your staff of not serving them with the same courtesy that they do other customers. Making threats to harm, or using a quiet voice or silence. And this one can throw people sometimes because we often think of verbal aggression as being loud and disruptive. But if someone is typically very talkative, friendly, outgoing, and you notice that today they're pretty quiet, they're not interacting with other people, they're talking in a really low tone, it's a shift from their normal, it's probably a red flag to pay attention to and something to make note of. When we consider both the verbal and the behavioral signs of aggression, most of these things are pretty obvious, right? If someone is shouting, if someone is slamming doors, if someone is making threats, if someone is sort of punching their fist, these are obvious signs of aggression. And yet there are days when we all miss these things. They get past us, we don't notice them. And I want to acknowledge that there are obstacles that we all experience to noticing these warning signs. Things that might get in our way are multitasking. Maybe we're just doing too many things to pay attention to everything that's going on in our store or in the business lobby. Sometimes we're feeling tired or frustrated, and so we miss things because we're just not at the top of our game. And then another reason we might miss warning signs is because we get desensitized. And what I mean by that is maybe we're used to seeing these things, especially when working with the public. You know, working in the library, it's not uncommon for people to raise their voice. It's not uncommon for people to get frustrated with one another. And sometimes we think, oh, this is just business as usual. This is all in a day's work. I'm going to wait and see how this plays out. But waiting and seeing how something plays out can be risky. And so my encouragement to you is when you notice these warning signs, take them seriously and be ready to respond. So our first step is to identify warning signs. The second step is to diffuse hostility. So you notice that someone's in your space and they seem agitated. We now want to step in and try to resolve any conflict or upset at the lowest level possible. And there are 3 sub-points. I'll go through them one by one under this diffuse hostility point. The first is that we always want to maintain our own composure. We do that by remaining calm, by speaking slowly and clearly, and by keeping an open posture. If we are standing very close to someone, which we're probably not doing now because we're social distancing, but in a different time, we might be standing very close to someone. We might have our arms crossed. We need to be aware of our facial features and make sure that our posture is calming, welcoming, and open. You also want to know your own triggers and your own limits. We all have them. So if there's a certain customer who comes in and pushes your buttons every time, or a type of behavior or situation that you know is really upsetting for you and it's hard for you to manage, it's okay to ask for help in those situations or leave if you need to. The second point in diffusing hostility is securing the environment. So making sure that your physical space is safe for your employees and your customers. Megan, you can go ahead and put up the next point. We secure the environment by, if and when possible, separating a person who's escalated from others so that other people don't start to feel afraid or unsafe or sort of join in the chaos. So you might say to someone, let's go talk about this in my office. Or is there a private place we can continue this conversation? Let's step into the hall. You want to remove potentially dangerous objects. And again, when I talk about this in a clinical setting, we have a saying that everything and anything can be used as a weapon. So in mental health and social work, we're pretty careful about having our scissors and our staplers in our drawers. Not having heavy objects that can be picked up and thrown through a window or at a person. So this may or may not be relevant to your space, but I do encourage you, maybe next time you walk into your business or you look at your office, maybe view it through a different lens and think, is this a safe place or are there potential risks here? If you're in an office with someone who's upset having a conversation, I encourage you to try to keep your door slightly open. That's so that other people who are outside of your office can hear the conversation and just keep an ear out and intervene if necessary. And I also encourage you to stay close to the exit. So you never want to have a person who's upset and escalated blocking your way to a door. You want to be the one that's closest to the door if your door is over here, so that you can leave if necessary or call for help. And then our third point in diffusing hostility is actively listening and responding to concerns. This is essentially good customer service, and I have a feeling that many of you are already doing this well, but it's nice to be reminded. If people are experiencing empathy and understanding, they are much more likely to calm down, to lower their emotional intensity, and also be willing to negotiate. And there are some really simple ways that we actively listen. We do that by nodding our head, by validating people's concerns. Some of you did that, gave really great examples of that in the chat when we went through the scenario of saying things like, I understand you're frustrated, or yeah, I know wearing a mask is uncomfortable, or I hear that you're not getting your needs met today. You want to validate and then restate so that people know that you're really listening to them and that you want to serve them. So we've gone through the first two steps of our model. They are to identify warning signs and then attempt to diffuse the hostility using these active listening cues. The third step is to make a plan for safety and follow-up. This is where you reach an agreement about next steps and how to respond. We identify action steps that both the customer and the staff member will take. So you're essentially exploring who will do what, when to resolve the situation. Some of my best tips for good customer service fall under this point. They are giving the customer choice. We all like to have choice. None of us wants to feel like we're being told what to do and we don't have agency over our own life. You can ask your customer, what do you need to feel like this is resolved today? I always encourage you to state what you can do rather than what you can't do. You may hear the difference in these two statements. You can't come in if you're not wearing a mask versus I'll be happy to serve you once you put your mask on. When we use the phraseology can't, I cannot, I will not, it immediately shuts someone down and they feel kind of emotionally backed into a corner. Versus when we let someone know what we can do for them, it communicates that they do have options and we do want to help. So if this is maybe your one takeaway from the presentation, I say it's a pretty valuable one. We also want to provide people with options. Andrea, you mentioned this earlier. Some of our other partners in the chat brought this up. Let people know what you can do for them and then let them choose. You might say, you're welcome to put on a mask and stay in the building and we'll talk in person. If you prefer not to wear a mask, you can wait outside and use our curbside service. What's best for you? And then they get to choose. Those of you who have a toddler at home or maybe you've raised children have probably practiced this. You give them options. Would you like to wear the blue pants or the orange pants? But not wearing pants is not an option. They still get to choose, so they feel good about it.
Right. And just to add on to that a little bit, the options that you give, you need to be able to deliver on, right? So if you ask too many open-ended questions, then you can kind of go down this rabbit hole, right? So, to be aware of when you are phrasing things in that positive way and providing options, they should always be options, that you can deliver on, right? You never want to give an option and then they take you up on it and now you can't deliver.
I think that's a really great point. That raises anxiety not only from your customer, but also for us as a staff person to say, oh, I'm kind of stuck in a corner now, not able to do this thing, and I really want to serve you. Yeah, great point, Andrea. Part of follow-up and planning may involve making referrals. That could be a referral to your website. It could be a referral to your app. It could be a referral to a partner business or a different kind of community resource. And then lastly, when it's necessary, report concerns you have to a supervisor or a colleague. Think about who needs to be informed about what's happening in order to move forward or to provide a continuity of service or to review a workflow or a procedure. That way you're not holding this situation all by yourself. That's a lot of responsibility.
Can I ask a question here, Melissa?
Please,
Because
of
again,
course.
when we're working, with a team, you talked about how, recognizing your own triggers and, some customers, might just know exactly which triggers to push.
Yep.
And, there can even be kind of this, weird psychology that happens where, it ramps it up. So
Yeah.
knowing what your triggers are and knowing, the specific, issues with a specific customer, when you talk about creating a plan for safety, that plan could be every time so and so comes into the store, I need my coworker to offer the initial customer service, right? I mean,
Yes.
you could come up with a plan like
Great
that, right?
example. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great example, Andrea. I have done that in mental health settings. There have been a couple times in my career where, for whatever reason, I really set a client off. It could be that I look like someone from their past who has harmed them. It could be that they don't like the tone of my voice. But whatever it is, the moment they see me or I talk with them, it's very upsetting for them and it tends to make a scene. So the plan has been, this client will work with another provider. And we have situations like that in the library too. There are some patrons who, for whatever reason, don't like this staff member, or this staff member is really frustrated with this patron. And so they'll step off the desk or they'll have another colleague respond. I think that's a great example. Yeah. Yeah, and I would hope that we are creating in our workplaces a sense of safety to where we're all comfortable sort of sharing those things honestly. It doesn't mean that we're not good at our job. I mean, they're not only person, all following those things up and ask for the support they need. Our last step in the de-escalation model is debriefing. So we talked about identifying warning signs, diffusing hostility, making a follow-up plan, and last is debriefing. And debriefing is simply a review of an experience with the people who were involved. So we talk about what happened. This is a step that I think is often overlooked, but it's really, really important because this is where we review what took place, what could have gone differently, what went well, and then we plan how we might respond to similar situations in the future. A debrief can take place one-on-one with a supervisor or a colleague. It can take place in person, on a Zoom meeting, over the phone, during a staff meeting. The most important thing about debrief is that the conversation is being had. Up on the screen are a few components of debriefing. Here you have an opportunity to ask your colleagues and supervisors for support. So you might say something like, how would you have handled this? What might you have said if you were in the situation? Another way of asking for support might be, I need a break right now. Can you cover the desk? During a debrief, we talk about what went well and what could have been differently, like I said. As a team, we make plans for addressing similar issues in the future. So if this customer comes back into the store, how will we respond? If we run out of this product, how will we respond? Sometimes this gives us an opportunity to review and rework our procedures and our protocols for troubleshooting. The next point is that you might take a break if needed as part of a debrief. You may need to step off the floor, take a lunch break, go for a walk, get some fresh air. The debrief provides an opportunity to care for yourself as the staff member and to offer care to your employees. And then the last point reiterates what I just said. You want to care for yourself at work and at home. So that could look like taking a break, as I mentioned, making sure that you pack your lunch and lay out your clothes the evening before work so that you're not stressed and scrambling in the morning and then you come into work maybe feeling frazzled. I have colleagues who have certain rituals like listening to a meditation or doing some deep breathing both before and after their shift. So when we're debriefing with colleagues, we're also talking about how we can take care of ourselves to feel supported and successful in our workplaces. I would love to hear from you, Andrea, or others in the chat around Are there ways that you in your workplace are supporting colleagues that feels good to you? Have you heard of things other businesses are doing in the way of debriefing? This is kind of an opportunity to share with one another what's working well and maybe learn from some of our peers.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I think that there's, again, it all comes back to just really, focusing and prioritizing communication,
Yeah,
right? That employees know that, it's safe to talk about, it's safe to communicate, that they know that they are supported and that they can come to work as their true authentic self, and
yeah,
that there's no kind of fear of retribution if they share with their supervisor, I felt really unsafe when this happened, right?
yes,
I think that starts a lot earlier in the process, right? About creating a company culture
it
where
does, absolutely.
people feel safe and supported, and they can, communicate without fear. So I would say that, when we're talking to our members and where, we've seen most success, with de-escalation strategies, it does start with that. There's already that support system, within the company culture that's there. That's, again, it seems pretty simple, but just it's trust, right? And it's, you got my back, right?
Yes.
We're in this together, and just how important that is.
Yeah.
And then we do have, some, questions and things coming in from the chat. And I think these are probably more general questions that we can, talk about, towards the end.
Okay.
But specifically, right, along, creating that company culture and, caring for, ourselves and, our colleagues. It's really important. And I think, again,
Yes.
open to other, ideas about, how can we create more of a culture of self-care, and where we're caring for each other, where, we don't feel guilty about it, right?
Yes.
If you need to take a day off, take a day
Yeah.
off. If you need to take a break, take a break.
Yes. Yes. I have that conversation so frequently with staff in all positions and all settings. I think for the most part, we want to do good work. We enjoy the work we do. We want to serve our communities well. And we put a lot of pressure on ourselves sometimes, more pressure than anyone else puts on us to maintain a certain type of persona when we're in the workplace, to be as efficient as possible, to get as much done in a day as we can, to not take time off unless we absolutely have no choice but to do so. And that can be so exhausting. We are good employees, but we are also human. And so it's important to take breaks, to admit when we need support or help, to take days off. And I do think that that cultural piece you're talking about is really key. Leadership particularly has an opportunity to set that tone and to lead by example, to say, that customer interaction really threw me off too. I was unsure of what to do, or I feel like I need a break after that. I need some extra support, or I'm going to take a mental health day. And I think that when colleagues, staff members see that leadership is promoting that message and being the first to be vulnerable and set that example, then we tend to feel more comfortable doing so as well.
Absolutely. And then even thinking about it's okay to make mistakes, right? And that we learn a lot, from mistakes, again, coming originally from the healthcare background, I mean, that's right. That's how you prevent, future mistakes, is you say, like, oh, how did this mistake happen in the healthcare setting? And then how do we prevent it from happening? If you don't talk about it and you pretend like it never happened, it's gonna happen again. And so I think it's really important, for, staff and colleagues to get together and just, have those open, honest conversations about, what went well, what didn't go well. And, we can all learn from our mistakes.
Yeah, we can. And especially now, I feel like there's an extra dose of graciousness because we're all sort of making things up as we go along. We're all trying new things. We're all having to be very creative and innovative. And it's okay to say, we tried that, It didn't work as well as we thought. What do we need to tweak in order to move forward? Yeah, thanks, Andrea. So on the next slide, we are going to revisit the customer scenario that we talked about a little bit earlier. And what I'm hoping we can do is read it again and then break down these 4 steps in the de-escalation model against this scenario. So we're going to talk about each one together. And I'm hoping that those who are watching will chime in via chat, and Andrea, you can chime in as well when it comes time. So I'll go ahead and read this scenario again, and then we're just going to talk through step by step. You're in the midst of a busy workday, managing colleagues, juggling online and curbside business procedures, and keeping up with frequent disinfecting protocols. Your safety guidelines are clearly posted on the door, including a sign that all customers must wear a mask to enter. A customer walks into your business without a mask on. You greet them and ask that they please put on a mask if they'd like to be served. The customer rolls their eyes, comes close, and leans toward you and refuses. This is so stupid. I shouldn't have to wear a mask if I don't want to. It's my health, my body. I've seen plenty of people in the stores without masks. Do you want my business or not? Because I'll go somewhere else and tell other people you're discriminating against customers. Let's start with step 1 of the model we reviewed, warning signs. What are some behavioral or verbal warning signs that this customer is displaying? What are those red flags? How do we know they're upset?
So I think the first thing is not acknowledging the directions, right? So so when they see something that's clearly posted and they choose to ignore it, that's that first warning sign.
Yeah.
But then the rolling of the eyes is the next cue that maybe this isn't gonna be an easy situation.
Right. Right. Already their nonverbal communication is disrespectful toward you. They're dismissing your signage. They're dismissing your directions. They're coming close, so they're invading your personal space. And how about the words they're saying? There's a threat in there. Do you want my business? I'll go somewhere else. I'll give you a bad Yelp review. They're threatening your livelihood, like you pointed out, Andrea. Step 2, diffuse hostility. What are some of the ways we might validate this person's concern? What are some options that we might give them? How would we make sure that they feel heard?
I think we had some good, some good suggestions, at the beginning, right? So again, some of the comments were, I'm so sorry you feel that way. Offering, to give them a mask. We have masks for here for you, please take one if you need one so we can keep everyone healthy. So I think that, again, as we were talking about, just, beginning with that empathy and, relating to the customer. I know, I'm so sorry, right? I understand. It must be really hard. Sorry you feel that way. It's uncomfortable. I know, how can I continue to help and provide service? And like you said, here are some options.
Yeah.
You can have a mask that I'm providing for you. You can, come back later and, and I can serve you outside. I can serve you over the phone, right? Here's a link to our, our online, business where you can continue to participate. So those, providing those options.
They're great responses. I also really appreciate that in the chat, a few people suggested explaining that we're asking you to wear a mask for everyone's health and safety. I think we all respond better to directions when we know the why behind it, rather than we feel like we're just being asked to do something arbitrary for no good reason. And, in talking about the community's health and safety, you're really appealing to a shared value there. Who doesn't want to get on board with the community's health and safety? So sometimes giving a bit of an explanation can be helpful. The third step is making a plan for safety and follow-up. I wonder if there might be some kind of follow-up needed in this situation, if it would be important to notify a supervisor or coworkers that this had happened. And I realize that might vary depending on what kind of business you're in. But what thoughts do folks have about next steps?
So while we're waiting for people to maybe chime in there on the chat with what their next steps, should be, again, maybe just a question for you, Melissa, in terms of a plan for safety. Again, that plan probably starts early on, and just, even how you're setting up the work environment. And so we've all had to rearrange the work environment so that we can social distance. And so everything is different. But, we've been really focused on setting up the work environment, based on the governor's, safe start plan, right? So the social distance stuff, but it might, create, other challenges, with space or access, or, where products are. And so I think probably having that plan for safety, especially, as people are coming in, so that maybe there is almost kind of that checkpoint, for people to acknowledge, okay, well, in case you missed that first sign, here's another, here's another opportunity for you to, understand that this is the expectation in this establishment. And I know we've seen lots of signage, that like you said, also includes the why, that it's not just, wear a mask or else, right? It's, we're asking, you to wear a mask so that we can continue to stay in business, right? So that we can, keep our employees and our customers safe. Thank you for your understanding. So I think it's also, the plan for safety starts, before you probably even open the doors to the business, right? And then the follow-up, absolutely, other than, again, providing that choice. And then here's a question. You talked about maybe opening or keeping the door open in the office so that other coworkers could kind of hear and understand. I know that when, we worked in the pharmacy, we kind of had like secret hand signals for, if something was escalating to the point, where we needed help, but we didn't want to say, manager, so then, because then that escalates it too. Like, well, why are you calling the manager? So would you suggest that could also be, kind of a, you could almost have a code word, or a hand signal that, that, your coworkers could be looking out for? I think, Melissa, you froze a little bit there.
I think we're going to Oh,
you're back.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. It comes back to your earlier point about communication, Andrea, and that's something that could be agreed upon by the team, whether it's a hand signal or a code word. I think that there are also ways of communicating things sort of subtly. So rather than saying to a customer, I'm going to go get my manager, you might say, I'm going to go grab a coworker who knows a little bit more about this and see if they can help us brainstorm. They may not necessarily need to know that that person is the manager. They just recognize this as an additional level of support or service. Yeah. I've also been in, and this again worked really well in a clinical setting, and I think it depends on the size of your business, but I worked out in one office where I was that we had a Google group chat that was only for emergencies when someone needed backup, and it was always just pulled up and minimized at the bottom of the screen. And so if someone was meeting with a client and they felt like they needed additional support in their office, they would just go ahead and type into the screen, can I get backup in office number, wherever. And it wasn't disruptive to the client because the provider was already typing on their computer, making notes. And so it was easily able to communicate that way. So maybe there's some kind of a digital system like that you could implement. How about debriefing? We've talked about this a little bit, actually, sort of naturally, because part of the debrief could be we need an office or workplace communication system for these situations. So that could be something to bring up in a debrief. Are there other elements of this scenario that you think it would be important to debrief?
I think this maybe goes a little bit to a question that we have, in the chat too, which, is, what happens after this customer leaves and they do make, unflattering social media posts that can harm a business.
Yeah.
What if, they shot a video that, is edited so that, it's just that piece of the, employee saying, you need to leave, right? And that's all that's, being taken and shared. And then we all know, how quickly, things can, just kind of go downhill online as people are just taking snippets of the information. They don't see the full story. And how or what, the next steps, should a business take? And so that's a huge, debrief, I think, that businesses need to know and kind of have a plan for, how do we, engage or do we not engage, when someone is, making these disparaging comments about our business, online. And, maybe you could talk a little bit about, about that in terms of a debrief plan.
Mm-hmm. That's a great thing to talk about with the team. And that is it feels like it's the reality of our society. We encountered something like that at the library. We had a patron who was making rounds to different library branches and egging on our staff and then videotaping their responses. Making threats to them and putting those things online. And it caused a tremendous amount of disruption for our staff. They weren't feeling safe, even though they were responding according to our procedures in the ways that they were instructed. They still felt attacked and vulnerable. And yes, it does not reflect well on the library. And I wasn't part of conversations regarding how to respond. Our media team, our social media and public relations team, as well as our safety team and our managers figured out the best response to that. So I don't know if I can answer the question directly, because I would imagine that each business has its own protocol around how to respond to social media posts. But I do think that it's really important to talk about as a team, because it does have an impact on other customers and staff, and because we all want to be on the same page when it comes to how we're responding. And it may be that it's an opportunity to sort of re-examine what the procedures are around those kinds of things.
Perfect. And I would just say, especially the person who's asking this question, we help a lot with our businesses, on just kind of coming up with a social media plan and, what's a communication strategy that you should adopt at your business. Mm-hmm. And there definitely are, do's and don'ts, for, how to respond or engage, with someone, online. And, I'd be happy to, go through those if they wanted to reach out to, us at the chamber later. A few just like quick snippets in terms of, responding to negative comments online are to ask questions, right? So again, the questions are, a non-threatening way, to try to engage. So, again, I'm so sorry that you had a negative experience at our business. Where, we are committed to providing, excellent customer service to all of our customers. Can you tell me, what day, what time you were there? Are you willing to, have a conversation, with us offline about this? We want to, again, going back to that beginning, statement of, what would it take for you, to feel like this was, remedy to your satisfaction? And I think that those are, you don't want to necessarily ignore it, but how you respond, is also important, because then honestly, it's truly less about that individual, and it's more about how everybody else sees you responding to that individual.
That's a great point. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then we have a couple of great thoughts in the chat too, in terms of debriefing, which I'm so glad this was brought up, of just the importance to keep an incident log. And so, again, in employee handbooks, what's the difference between an accident and an incident? And, how do you file an incident report versus an accident report? And then how are incident reports, tracked and followed up on? I think that's huge. And, again, then there's a document, there's a file that helps with training, right? Also, because then people can go back and like, oh, okay, so, are there trends with the incidents? Like if we're getting, 15, of the same incident, every week, maybe we need to revisit our procedures, right? Because our procedure says staff does this, but gosh, it's leading to a lot of incidents. Maybe we need to, update our procedures the same way that you would with an accident report, right? Gosh, seems like everybody's, falling in the bathroom, like what's happening, like it's because the floor is always wet or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was a really good point.
Yes.
So thank you to the, person who put that into the chat. Thank you.
Yes. I love the energy around this conversation. And what I'm hearing is that part of your plan for follow-up and the making referrals component and the debrief could be reach out to the chamber for additional resources about how to respond to social media posts or how to develop incident reporting procedures. You have a lot of resource that fits in really nicely with different aspects of this model and some of the steps we're talking about. And thank you to those of you who are watching for those comments and questions. I think they're wonderful. So I mentioned when I talked about the outline at the beginning of the presentation that this model relates mostly to engaging with individuals, and I think you can probably see why. But there are instances when there are groups of people who are agitated or hostile in our spaces, and we want to respond to that a little bit differently. So the next slide goes over that protocol. So I'm going to provide some do's and don'ts of dealing with hostile groups. But before we put up all the points, I want to talk about why diffusing this type of group incident at the lowest level possible is so important. One of the reasons is that maybe most simply, if staff are hurt or there's damage to your space, then your services are unavailable to the public. And when there are a group of people who are upset or agitated, whether that's directed toward a staff member or members of the public who are angry with one another, things are more likely to escalate more quickly and the effects could be sort of impounded or compounded, not impounded. Another reason is that if there are people who are upset in your space and other customers don't see staff responding in an effective way, they may feel unsafe and they may not be likely to come back as customers. So let's go through some of these do's and don'ts. If there are a group of people or even just two people who are angry with one another in your space, you want to always put your own safety first. So stay out of harm's way and stay near the exits. You never want to try to step between people who are fighting. And I've done this training in a number of settings, and depending on the setting or the staffing model, I always get some pushback and people will say, oh, I know my clients really well, they wouldn't hurt me, or I know my customers very well, and I'm confident that if I stand between them, they'll stop fighting. And my response is always, never stand between people who are physically aggressive or verbally aggressive, because you're putting yourself in a lot of risk and you never really know how someone might act when they're very upset. So stand out of harm's way and make sure you have a clear path to the exits. The second point is that you want to use very short directive statements with people rather than trying to reason with them. You can probably relate that when you're upset or you're agitated, we're acting in feelings mode, not rational mode. So it's hard to follow directions. It's hard to see things from another person's point of view. You want to give short, clear directive statements that are easy to follow. Examples of those are things like, I need you to leave the store, please. I need you to put on a mask. I'm asking you to lower your voice. Please step out of the room with me. Simple, short, easy to follow along with. Now is not the time to try to get someone to see things from your point of view. A third tip is to clear the environment of people and objects. So if there's a group of people who are upset, we don't want a lot of spectators to that chaos. It sort of adds to the escalation and the anxious feelings in the space. So you might ask other customers to please step away while you resolve this problem, or please leave the building and come back in 10 minutes or whatever time you think. We don't want to get caught up in making a scene. The next point is to call for help. Help could be 911, it could be the police, but it could also be your coworker or your manager, like we've talked about. There are even instances where another customer or another client could be helpful to you. And this leads into the next point, which is delegating tasks so that supportive people know what their role is. So you might say to a coworker, I'm going to pull this person into the other room. Will you please call 911? You could even say to a customer who you know is there to be helpful, will you call 911 while I clear the space? Make sure that you're communicating with the people around you, delegating tasks rather than trying to diffuse the situation alone. And you can go ahead, Megan, and put up the last point on the screen. Yeah, there it is. So safety of yourself, your staff, and the space, and communication are the two most crucial points when we're managing multiple people who are upset. And again, this is whether the anger and the hostility is directed at you or your staff, or whether it's 2 or 3 people who are arguing with one another. This part of the presentation wraps up my portion. I want to thank you, Andrea, and others who are tuning in for your engagement, for your feedback, your input, and your good questions. And I don't have a clock in front of me, but I do believe we have time for some Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have a number of questions, that have come in. So again, we have time. So if you haven't had a chance to put your question into the comments section on Facebook, or if you haven't had time to do that yet, if you're attending as a Zoom attendee, we do have time to do that. But I have some questions here, Melissa. Okay. So we'll just start right away. Okay. And so the first question. What kind of training would you suggest for people who have no experience with de-escalation, right? And so again, we would say they should watch this webinar, yeah. But what other resources, are there, in the community, right? We know that we can train employees on, handling food safely. We know that we can train employees on a number of other things, and that those trainings are available. What resources are available within the community?
I would say start with a foundational de-escalation training. So this training today was pretty foundational. I would also encourage revisiting this topic over and over and over. I've been in the field for years, and I still freeze up when I'm faced with a situation like this and have to try to get over my emotional response and tune into my rational brain and remember what I've learned. So I would encourage businesses to offer this to your staff on a recurring basis. Whether it's always at orientation and then once every year for those who want a refresher. That being said, I would recommend Crisis Connections, which is a nonprofit in King County. They offer crisis emergency response services, tons of mental health and social service resources, and community and corporate training. So if you go to the Crisis Connections website, it's just crisisconnections.org, and I can put that in the chat. And maybe we could send that out with some follow-up resources too. You'll find a link on their website that says Get Training, and you'll see sort of a menu of training subject areas that they offer, and you can either sign up for a public training or ask that they come to your workplace and do some training that's specifically customized for your staff.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, forgive me. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I was just saying that's great. That's great. We appreciate it. And yeah, we'll make sure to send that out so people have the resource.
I also think there's a lot of overlap between de-escalation and customer service. And you may have seen that in the presentation even today. So offering staff ongoing customer service training will be really helpful as well.
Perfect. And then this question is, is there some type of a printable pocket guide that can be printed and shared with employees, and kind of, what would that include? I think that, again, I've worked at places where, the steps were outlined, right? So you could actually flip to, this is the situation that's happening, and here are some, some tips or some guidelines, some accepted procedures for how to work through this situation, right? So there is something about, like you said, when you get into that fight, flight, or freeze, kind of mode, having something that you can, refer back to, is probably good. Again, probably when you're in the moment, you don't want to, like, oh, just a second, let me check my guide. It doesn't work for every situation. But would you suggest, I mean, maybe even just having, a little printout for employees that just say, identify, diffuse, plan, and debrief, right? Just something that could be, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And that could be maybe a project that a team works on together, or that a team works on with some support for the chamber. Each workplace will have its own protocols and procedures, and even the way that the space is set up is different. So some of us are at work, sitting at a desk behind a computer. And in those instances, I've worked with staff members who put just a sticky note reminder on their computer screen, something like ask good questions or take a deep breath before responding, whatever it is that they feel like they need to be prompted. Others of us are walking around in a retail space every day, so we can't readily look at a sign that's up. I think that could be a really good conversation and a project for each work group to do together, see what makes sense for them.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next question. What techniques can be used to actually prevent escalation from even happening? So, I guess this is where, we need to, how do you tune in so that you recognize those early warning signs, sooner, so that it doesn't end up, becoming the scene, that sometimes it happens. And I think, again, it's so hard because we are multitasking, right? And so, like, I'm sanitizing this and I'm doing this over here, and then you don't even realize the situation is happening until you hear that voice, that's raised. So I don't know if you have any thoughts, and, techniques on that. My initial thought would just be, however and wherever possible, try to focus on the customer, right? So, if that's, creating a business plan, that, where you, like we talked about delegating, you delegate one staff person to just do the sanitizing, and then you dedicate another staff member to, like, all I need you to do is eyes on the customers.
Yes.
That will help. If you're focusing in, you can be a little bit more aware, and then react, maybe a little bit quicker. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
I like your suggestion to sort of divide and conquer in a really intentional way. Unfortunately, we won't be able to prevent all situations from escalating, but I do think that if we are proactive in providing really great customer service, again, there's so much overlap here, that it's less likely for someone to be upset in our space. And what I mean by that is, if we make contact, if we are the first person to initiate contact with someone who walks in the door by saying, welcome, we're so glad you're here, regardless of what had gone on for them earlier in the day or what icky attitude they walked in with, if they are greeted with kindness and welcomed, it's probably going to cause them to pause, maybe breathe a little deeper, and switch their frame of mind. And so then they may be more agreeable, be more willing to negotiate when they're interacting with you. I'm also thinking of situations I've been in where I know I come into it on the defensive. So I'm often aware of this in myself. Like, if I have a problem with a product or an order, and I'm needing to call customer service, and I'm going to be on hold for a very long time, I'm going to have to choose from a menu of options, and no matter what number I push, I'm not going to get to a person, and I'm not going to get the thing that I need, and the person on the other end of the phone is probably not going to be very patient with me. That's my expectation, so I start the phone call like, kind of revved up. But then if the person on the other line says, hello, Mrs. Glenn, thank you so much for calling. How are you today and how can I help you? It like immediately disarms me because I wasn't expecting the kindness. So I think that if we are the first ones to provide that excellent level of service, it's going to diffuse some of whatever tension might already be coming our way.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's also part of our training for helping to, for loss prevention, right? So, customers are trained,
Yeah.
right? When you greet someone as soon as they walk through the door,
Yes.
with kindness, hi, welcome, how can I help you? Right. They know, again, same for loss prevention. They know that they are being recognized,
Yes.
that they are being seen. And so I would say, yes, as much as possible, and, as easily as you can in your business, just have that person, dedicated, to providing that customer service. And I think that the other thing that often happens, if somebody comes in ramped up and the business is busy, right? So there's no acknowledgement, right? Then it ramps it up even more. And I know that's really hard, now because we are so busy and we are trying to multitask and do so many things. But as much as possible, just going above and beyond with that, the welcoming and the customer service and that positive reinforcement, right?
Yeah. I want to acknowledge what you said just now, Andrea, which is that this is hard. And maybe we should have started out the presentation with that acknowledgement that none of this is easy. None of it is comfortable, especially now. Things are busy. We're learning new ways of doing things. Our emotions are high. Our patience may be low. We may be short-staffed. And I want to put that out there and acknowledge that many of us are feeling sensitive, and these are not easy things.
No, absolutely. So we have one more question, and then we'll have time, for a final thought. And this is a question about improv. And so, improv, we actually have a member, Improv Mindset, and they do a lot of work, with businesses, just, using improv to, help think quickly, think on your feet, it's yes and, right? Not right, as a technique. What would you think about, maybe kind of employing that, type of work into some of your team training so that you can kind of act out different, scenarios together?
I love it. Love it. I think it's creative. I think it's fun. I think it forces us to be vulnerable with our coworkers and to try things and to fail and to laugh. This is all improv, and much of our work is because our engagement with the public is not scripted. So I actually love the use of the word improv because it makes it a little bit playful. And like I said at the beginning, these are skills that we get better at by practicing them. So what better way to practice than by running through scenarios, going through role plays in a place where it's comfortable and there's really nothing at stake if things don't go the way we want them to before we're actually out on the floor. I love the idea.
I also love the idea of, again, testing out, what your procedures are first, because I think that's also like, oh, this is what my boss told me to say, but I don't really know how to do it. Being able to, not just do the onboarding training where, you're going through, okay, do this, but, having that feedback loop is, so important.
Yes.
Fantastic. All right. Well,
Questions.
Really good questions. Yeah, really appreciate it. Any final thoughts, Melissa, as we, kind of close out today and go into our world with more empathy and kindness?
Thank you to you, Andrea, and your team at the Chamber, and to everyone who tuned in today for the wonderful work that you're doing in our communities. Things are tricky right now and they're confusing, and I think we're all tired and sensitive, and I know that you all continue to serve the public, and it's you serving the public and me serving the public and you, Andrea, serving the public and making sure that people feel safe and cared for and heard, that allows then all of our businesses to run more effectively and creates a healthier community. I truly believe that. So big thank you to all of the work that you're doing. And my thank you is always followed with that. And please take good care of yourselves. clock off when you're done, eat your lunch outside, do something that feels good to you on weekends, spend time with people you care about where you can let your guard down. We sometimes can get so caught up in caring for other people that we forget to take care of ourselves. So that is my encouragement, which is also a bit of a challenge.
I appreciate that, Melissa. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights and your expertise with us. Thank you so much to Scott and South King Media for helping us get the information out to our community. Thank you so much to our attendees, those who joined us on Zoom, those who joined us on Facebook, so that we could share this conversation together. This webinar is recorded and we will be posting it to our website later so that you can view it. That's at seattlesouthsidechamber.com. And again, really appreciate your support and your any and all contributions, for our nonprofit so that we can continue to provide opportunities like this to our community. I hope everyone stays safe, stays healthy, and we'll see you back on Friday, August 28th for our next webinar where we're going to be talking about career transitions. So again, from us to you, thank you. Have a great weekend. Bye.